let's start talking about, okay, how does all this relate to remote work? Suddenly we've all had to go remotely, and what are you seeing working with teams? What kind of challenges and what advice are you giving to teams, agile teams working remotely, things like that?
Yeah, I'll say that the teams that got the self-organization thing figured out are probably
Yeah,
doing really well.
right.
The
Yeah,
teams that aren't probably really struggling right now.
right.
Heard from some different organizations I've worked with that if they would work the way they used to, where they were more micromanaging,
Mm-hmm.
to where we are now, where they're much more aligned around products and value and
Mm-hmm.
self-organization,
Mm-hmm.
there's no way they would be able to function and even operate in this new world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what I tell teams is when you go to remote, like just
Mm-hmm.
simulate what you would do if you were in the real world. And
Right.
so what I mean by that is, let's just say you and I right now we're on a Zoom call. If
Yep.
I were to shut my video off, that would be
Right.
that would be like us sitting in a meeting room and me putting a bag over my head and cutting
Yeah.
off the audio, so I can see you, but you can't see me. That would be just
Right.
weird. Don't do that, right? Like it's
Yes.
it's kind of one of those things. Or like if you were on a Zoom call and you started sending personal messages back and forth while somebody else was talking, that kind of be like
Mm-hmm.
passing notes in the back of the classroom. Not
Right.
cool, right? Like we would call that out, and if that was in a professional environment. So don't do
Right.
those types of things.
Right.
So I always like think about what would it look like in person with what we're doing, and how can we
Mm-hmm.
best translate that?
Right.
So there's a lot of features that are out there in Zoom. I think Zoom's a great tool.
Mm-hmm.
Where you can make like when I do my classes, I make everybody a co-host, and
Mm-hmm.
then we do a lot of breakout rooms, and that gives them the ability to move from a breakout room, so a small group of let's just say 4 people, and they say, oh, I have a
Ah,
question, I want to go talk to group 2. They can go and say, move me to group 2, and move themselves into group 2 and go talk to me. Just feel like I'm standing up at one table and going over and moving over to the other table.
nice. Yeah.
And you can do the same thing. They come talk to me the same way as the
Right.
instructor. So like however you can simulate what it would be like in person, do that. I would say that, other things I've learned is that the environment changes when you bring a canvas. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're doing a video like this, but if we all start doing exercises together and I put up a Google Jamboard or a mural
Mm-hmm.
or something like that, some kind of virtual whiteboard where people can add stickies, we can draw, we can type, we can do different things, and we can capture
Right.
ideas onto a canvas. It
Mm-hmm.
changes the whole dynamic of the meeting and the event that we're doing. So I'd highly recommend having something like that at your fingertips. And it might take a little bit of time before the meeting to, have that stuff kind of ready and prepared and think about how you're going to facilitate that.
Yeah. From from a facilitation stance, so what are some tips that you will give to like new Scrum masters? I'm pretty sure you have a lot of people who you teach Scrum who want to become a Scrum master. So, what are some tips that you give them after they're done from your class
Sure.
to enhance that?
Yeah. So I'd say the first thing is don't solve a problem for the team. Your job isn't to
Mm,
give them a fish, it's to teach them how to fish, right? And so
mm,
your job is to ask questions,
mm-hmm.
to not solve the problem, and it's gonna be painful at times. I mean, it's gonna be painful.
Right.
Like there's times where I start working with new teams and I used to count to 8 when we were in person in my back of my head, and I'd wait for them to say something, and sometimes they wouldn't say anything after I get to 8. It'd just be this big long awkward silence, and I just wouldn't
Yeah.
say anything. I'd be like, like, how do you want to handle this? And no one would say anything. Now when we're virtual, sometimes it's 12 or 15, and it's like eventually people get like, I'm not going to do this for you, you're going to have to figure it out on your own. And
Yeah.
part of it isn't, I don't think it's people being resistant. I think that for the longest time, people have said, oh, you can choose and you can pick, but if you pick the wrong answer, I'll pick for you. And they're just like, oh, sick of it. So they're waiting
Right.
for the rug to get pulled out from underneath them, and they're like, I'm just not going to engage with that. And so you have to really build that trust up that you really get to figure out how you're going to work, and you're going to be
Mm-hmm.
accountable for delivery. And so it's good for you to take some ownership in that. And what I like to do is then give them multiple options and be like, well, here's multiple ways you could solve this problem. Here's 3 or 4
Mm-hmm.
ways that I've seen teams solve this problem.
Right.
Or there's one of those you want to try, or does that give you an idea of something else you'd like to try? And then they might come up with and be like, well, how would you handle this, or how would you handle that? And I'll give them different questions, things that I'm thinking about. Hopefully I'm helping them think about problems the way I'm thinking about them, but I'm not solving the problem. So think about taking on different stances of a teacher, a mentor, a coach, a facilitator, a
Mm-hmm.
problem solver, not a problem solver, but like a manager of the process of like how people of the environment people work in. Um, those are all stances to be thinking of, and don't fall into the scribe secretary
Mm.
type of a stance where you're doing things for people. You're being the person that enters stuff into Jira or TFS or whatever tool you're using. The
Yeah.
person that does all the dirty work. That's not your job as a Scrum Master. So
Right.
I guess I would coach people to stay away from those types of things and
Right.
to really embrace what a true Scrum Master is, and that servant
Mm-hmm.
leader. But that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean it's a servant leadership is still leadership. It's not just somebody who gets walked over, right? So like
Right.
you need to lead through influence, not through
Right.
control.
Yeah.
You need to reveal instead of tell, and so
Mm-hmm.
revealing the system to people
Mm-hmm.
is a really powerful skill set for Scrum Masters. What I mean by that is you don't have to tell them the answer, reveal it to them. Show them here's the problem. Maybe it's with data, maybe it's with stories, whatever it might be. But when you can reveal the systems, people can't unsee that. And then they have
Right.
that mindset shift and they're going to make all the right decisions, or at least the decisions in the same direction you would
Right.
once they understand that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can definitely relate to that one. I come from consulting background, so that was one of my hardest thing is to not become the subject matter expert and really wait and take the coach's stance or use powerful questions or clean
Hmm.
language. So yeah, I think that is a huge area for growth for a lot of new Scrum Master or Scrum Master who are trying to become better. Um,
Yeah, I always kind of joke around and say the Scrum Master doesn't really do work and they don't get their hands dirty. Like they don't actually like do. They're like oil in the engine. They make everything run
right.
smoother, but they don't
Yeah.
actually like They don't make the pistons move. They're not part of
Right.
that. They just help everything move better.
Yeah.
And so if you feel like you're doing a lot of the work as a Scrum Master, then you're probably stepping into one of those
Yeah.
misinterpreted stances of a Scrum Master.
Yeah, and Jeff, I'm pretty sure you mentor a few new Scrum Masters too. So like that is one thing I actually have. The people that I mentor, I have to talk to them. They come to me and say, Vivek, I don't feel like I'm doing a lot or contributing. And they come to me. So if somebody comes to you, like I give them some tips in terms of how they can add value. But like, what are your advice for people who go from like a different field to go become a Scrum Master, and it's really different. You're like you said, you're not getting your hands dirty, so that kind of work is new, and there's also a little bit of imposter syndrome for the new
Hmm.
Scrum Master. So what's your advice for them?
Good question. I would say that everybody has imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
So I talked about Bob Galen right beforehand. He just had an
Yeah.
article on LinkedIn about he has imposter syndrome, and here's a guy who's
Oh wow.
has multiple books that he's authored. He's teaches agile leadership at executive levels across major companies,
Right.
and people look at him as the expert, right? But he still feels that. I think everybody feels that. So like it's okay. Like it's normal. I would say, have confidence, continue to learn, always be seeking to learn. Those would be the things, some of the things I would look to do as a Scrum Master to maybe get rid of that. I don't know, how do I actually provide value, or am I good enough to do this, or do I have the right answers?
Right.
But how do you? But the question of really how do you get away from the I don't know if I'm providing value. I think you have to say I don't do my job isn't to produce stuff. It's to make sure that I'm promoting a culture where people can grow and to flourish and the team can flourish. So you're taking more of a stance like a gardener. Like you don't actually make the garden grow. You just create the
Nice.
environment for them to grow.
Nice.
And so that's what your job is. And so look, you're on the watch for conflict. You're trying to mine for conflict and say when something's
Yeah.
small, let's figure out what's going on there. You're helping
Right.
the team to figure out how to run the most effectively and teach them. Another good measure is like, hey, what happens when you're not there? Can the team function without them? Are you helping them to not be reliant on you? Are you kind of almost working yourself out of a job? If you're doing that, that's probably a great thing because when the
Right.
team itself can now operate more independently and is high functioning, that gives you the flexibility to work on higher level things. Now you can go and work with the product owner, especially if it's across multiple teams. And now you can go work at the organization and say, hey, you know that HR practice where we promote individuals over teams? Like, that totally negates what we're talking about from a Scrum standpoint, because it's all about the team, and here we're saying it's all about the individual and heroes, and that those are in a conflict. How do we solve that, right? And so, or whatever the next biggest dependency that you have on your teams. There's an organization where it's like, oh, every year we rip these Scrum teams apart and we reform them on however we decide to do it, because we change the whole funding of where things are funded. So we get a high functioning team and then we break it apart and then we have to rebuild all that every single year. How do we stop that from happening? Those are big problems that aren't solved overnight. And as a Scrum Master, when your team's working on is highly functioning and can handle things without you, then you can go work on those big problems.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Yeah, thank you for that. So Jeff, maybe this is the last or second last question. So we wanted to learn, like, you've been an Agilist for a while, you run an Agile company. So what are some things that you are focused on, or you're trying to solve, or what's lying in your learning journey? What are you doing these days?
Yeah, so organizational agility is one of the things that I don't focus on Agile transformations or just the Agile journey. I think of Scrum and Kanban and extreme programming as tools to get us there. I like to dive more into what are the things inside the system that are stopping us from being more agile. How can we share information more frequently? How can we apply the transparency throughout? So why create a policy, right, to manage expenses? Would transparency just fix that? What if we just made that stuff transparent and it would self-regulate itself? Like, why? How can we open up flexibility so people can make decisions and have free flow of information? Those are things that I'm really passionate about. And they get outside of the Scrum team roles. They're more about like all the sub areas within the organization that support products being built. But they definitely create an environment and a culture, and I think those are the areas that I like to focus on right now. So I keep working with teams on that, and every team's a little different, and it's there's a lot of patterns that have emerged, but I'd say it's even more complex than maybe some of the product development world we're walking through some of those obstacles.
Nice. Well, that was amazing. Thank you so much again, Jeff. I actually learned a lot, your stance on how you view things. So I really appreciate it. And I'm pretty sure the audience is going to love it. And I'm pretty sure we encourage people who are watching this video to throw some questions, and happy to answer some of that in the comment section. But thank you so much, Jeff, again. It was great having you in the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. We will sure to come back with more exciting videos on Agile topics.